This is actually the first big presentation I've given in a while. And yeah, I'm really excited to do it. I think we're really on to something interesting with this series. So if you haven't, I really also suggest that you check out the other keynotes happening in this series for those watching later, those who have a chance to attend the future ones coming up. I really enjoyed Robin DeRosa's yesterday, and I think it connects to a lot of themes in this presentation as well. So with that, let's dive in. I do have quite the slide deck here, but I think what I'm going to actually do is start with this video. And so hopefully you all can see that on screen. And this video should just loop a bit. And we're actually just going to let that loop while I read you guys the land acknowledgement for where we are. So I'm joining you from a place called Moscow, Idaho. And the University of Idaho has official land acknowledgement, and it is this. U of I Moscow is located on the homelands of the Nimiipuu, Palouse, and Shishtamoose tribes, also known as the Nez Perce, Palouse, and Coeur d'Alene tribes. We extend gratitude to the indigenous people that call this place home since time immemorial. U of I recognizes that it is our academic responsibility to build relationships with the indigenous people to ensure integrity of tribal voices. The video that we're watching right here is a video that I shot with my partner a couple of years ago of a location called Kamiak Butte, and it's about 10 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. And it's partly here just to show you how beautiful this place is. The Palouse is a landscape that people come from all over to photograph, and it's not hard to see why when it's so beautiful and so dramatic. It is shaped the way that it is because of glacial floods. So it's this big rolling landscape. When you're standing down in these hills, you kind of it looks like you're looking at the window screensaver. So with that, we'll stop sharing our kind of meditative video here and start sharing my slide deck. So skipping back in this deck just a second, if you're the type of person who likes to follow along and click on the links that I might be mentioning, you're more than welcome to do that. This link is also for the future dissemination of this talk, should you be interested in checking up on anything that I said or sharing this out. So it lives at bit.ly wasted futures. Please note the capitalization. It does not work if you do not do that. Anyways, you can go there, and that's where this link is. And there are a lot of links in this document because there's mostly external research that I'm citing here, not my own. So there's a lot of stuff that you might want to follow up on. Okay, so we did our land acknowledgement from the U of I, but I also like to do my land acknowledgement, which is to sort of put my positionality in relationship to this work. So this is where Moscow, Idaho is. It's in the inland Pacific Northwest is what it's called. Some people don't even know there's such a thing as a inland Pacific Northwest. But this is where we are, right on the border of Idaho, Washington, and to a degree, Oregon. And this whole kind of region is called the Palouse, and it's that really unique landscape that I just showed you. This is also the homeland of a number of native tribes. There's actually 5 federally recognized tribes in the state of Idaho. In this particular region, the Palouse, the Spokane, the Coeur d'Alene, and the Nimiipuu all claim this area as a homeland. So this tribe on the right shows the original homeland of Nez Perce folks in this sort of wider area, and then how it's been reduced down to its current reservation, which is this much, much smaller area. So this presentation is on the title about nuclear energy, but to me, nuclear energy is so deeply related to indigenous concerns that in retrospect, I sort of wish I'd put something about that in that title to sort of help draw people into this. But as we work through this, that's really going to be my focus. And a big part of the reason for that is because of where I'm from. So I grew up in Northwest New Mexico. That's in the Four Corners region of the United States, down in the Southwest. And in particular, that area is home to the Navajo Nation. That's actually one of the largest reservations in the United States. And the Navajo Nation is a tribe that has really been closely interlinked with mining in a lot of different ways. And so the tribe has, for instance, had some positive relationships in terms of making money from coal mining, but this whole area, this whole huge land area here suffers really terribly from both the coal and natural gas mining and also uranium mining. This is just a sort of tiny little background about me, partly to sort of help situate myself as someone who's always been interested in technology. This is me with a robot that I built and won an award at the International Science Fair when I was a teenager. And actually, one of the things that I wanted to do as a next step with research back then that I wasn't able to do was to figure out what the rules were that you needed to give robots to produce social interactions. And I partly mention that because to me, it shows how computer scientists have always been fascinated with this question of how do we make like a robot or a computer that thinks? You know, that's something we've been pursuing arguably since, you know, the advent of science fiction and well before. But it's interesting to see how this idea has emerged and sort of caught on, and people are thinking of AI as a living thing, and AI is as alive as that robot was, which is not. It's just a machine. And no matter how interesting the behavior that machine produces is, it fundamentally remains a machine. So the Four Corners area of New Mexico is spectacularly beautiful, is sacred homeland to many native tribes as well, in addition to the Navajo tribe that I already mentioned. This is Angels Peak, Bloomfield, New Mexico, a beautiful monument, and then Shiprock, which is a sacred site to the Dene. That's actually a volcanic plug from an ancient volcano, so the top blew out and lands there. And this picture was taken last year during a really incredible Northern Lights storm that actually went all the way down south, which is very unusual. So the thing about Shiprock that I like to point out is it's actually right next to the power plant that my dad used to work at. So we lived about an hour away from this power plant, and my dad would drive there every morning at 6 a.m. and work all day as a project planner, project manager. And back here, you can see there's Shiprock. So this is a great picture to sort of summarize New Mexico. It's an incredibly beautiful landscape, an incredibly beautiful place. It has a very long cultural history for a lot of Native American and Latino, Chicano culture. And it's also just a place that's been really environmentally harmed and damaged and treated like a wasteland over and over and over. So if I could show you another picture to summarize New Mexico, this would be another one. And it's a sign saying all water from this river is contaminated by uranium. Don't drink this water. And this is at the Rio Puerco, which is actually more in the central part of the state than where we've been talking about. And this sign is in English, Spanish, and Dene or Navajo. And I think it's just such a great encapsulation of the New Mexican experience. And, you know, this sort of view right here, this is what it's like there, right? It's this incredible landscape with an incredible spiritual connection possible, and also the relationship that industrialism and extraction has produced on this landscape has been devastating. So today, also, I'm still in proximity to different uranium sites, and you may want to research this for yourself just to see what's around. I learned actually this while preparing for this presentation. So I'm here over by where on this map it says Pullman. This here is the Hanford site, which actually sits on the Columbia River watershed, and that's where America stores like just a huge amount of nuclear toxic waste. So that includes things from weapons and also some power plant stuff, but though it's primarily weapon production based. I also learned that there's a mine up here, which is right on a huge watershed where me and my partner have been thinking about possibly maybe trying to buy a house because there's no affordable housing super nearby and we're casting a wide net, you know? So really, really interesting how these nuclear pasts and futures are around us in so many ways. This is that Midnight Mine I was talking about that's up there in the Spokane Indian Reservation, actually. Okay, so just a very fast like nuclear 101 in like 3 minutes or less. We'll see how we do. This is a GIF that some like nuclear advocacy agency made, a pro-nuclear place. And the sort of goal of this is to show you like, oh my gosh, these fuel rods, they are stored so safely. There's just like nothing bad that could happen. And admittedly, when you watch this GIF, it seems pretty good. I mean, they're putting those rods in like a lot of stuff. For those who don't know a lot about nuclear energy, the main thing to know is that when you do anything with nuclear energy, you end up with this leftover rod that had the radioactive material in it that now needs to be stored because it's still radioactive. So nuclear production of any variety always involves creating these materials that are now radioactive to a degree that they'll be radioactive for millions of years. So the hope is that this kind of storage solution works. And, you know, you often think of it being in some like super high kind of, you know, high technology and high security facility, but in fact, many of these things are just stored out in the open. And especially in the United States, we have not done a good job figuring out how to store our nuclear waste. And so it actually sits on location most of the time. So I've got more information about that coming up, but I do also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to a university in Canada, and I use that as an opportunity to do some investigation into Canada's relationship with nuclear energy. And wow, I really learned a lot. I did not know anything and learned so much. So Canada, turns out, actually gets a lot of its energy from nuclear power, as much as or a little bit more than 50%. It's also a huge supplier of uranium to the United States. So here's a chart showing that in 2022, Canada supplied 27% of the uranium used in the US. And Canada is just a uranium giant. It's the world's second largest supplier of uranium. It has a long history of uranium exploration. It's not a recent thing. It's been discovered and solidly established. As of 2019, more uranium had been mined in Canada than anywhere else in the world. And in fact, Canada's made about a fifth of the world's total of uranium. And in fact, even more wonderfully for the sort of audience for this presentation, a lot of it actually comes from your province. So it's all coming from northern Saskatchewan with uranium grades that are actually really excellent. So you guys not only have a lot of uranium, but you have a lot of very strong, high quality uranium. So kind of crazy the coincidence in proposing this presentation. I did not know any of this when I did that. And in fact, the world's largest uranium refinery is found at Blind River, Ontario, which also happens to be the only facility of its kind in Canada. So I know that's not your province and that's a different place, but very interesting just to think about Canada's unique role in nuclear production. I had no idea. This is just a little map that shows some of these sites. So this is those aforementioned mines. And then this is sort of a more production, like power plant production, and then uranium fuel cells that come out of it. Concerningly, these are all very close to the Great Lakes, which is, of course, as climate change happens, becomes ever more and more valuable as the world's largest supply of fresh water. So really interesting and concerning, frankly, to see so much nuclear stuff on those lakes. And also it makes sense because nuclear things need a lot of water. So I mentioned earlier, the United States is not good at storing its nuclear waste. These are just some more fast facts to kind of situate that, if those are the sorts of things that help you to understand. So 80,000 tons of nuclear waste were being stored in the US in pools or dry steel and concrete casts just outside the power plants. So basically, it's kind of like if you made trash in your house and then you're like, I've got this big barrel outside my house and I just like store the trash there because there's no dump to send the trash to. There's nowhere for them to send the radioactive waste to. Nobody wants it in their backyard. Most people are aware that nuclear power produces nuclear waste, but a lot of people would be surprised to learn that 1 in 3 people in the US actually lives within 50 miles of a nuclear waste storage site. So really all around us in an American context in many ways. I do think Canada has done a better job of sending its waste to facilities, but then of course you just end up with the problem of having waste concentrated in a facility, and the core issue of no one's figured out how to make uranium less radioactive remains. As nice as that little GIF was, a lot of the reality doesn't look that way for those storage casts. So these are some examples of different ones. The ones on the left are at the Hanford nuclear facility, just 2 hours away from here. This other one I couldn't get a location on, but I put it so you can see how large these are and how often they're buried. Also, you might notice they're just being put into like unlined pits, which is like crazy. You know, it's like we're really just all in on these containers holding this stuff, and like there better not be an earthquake, there better not be any weird changes, or else, you know, like, well, sorry, watershed for like however big that area is. It's just really kind of wild that this is how we do it. Something else is these containers are huge, right? So like this, I just threw in here quick for scale. Like the ones that we're looking at in those images, it's hard to get a sense of the scale, but like they can be bigger than a house, right? So it's like these can be massive, massive containers. And also the other thing about radioactive stuff is like you don't need massive amounts of it. Even small amounts of it are quite problematic. And these tanks are leaking, right? So this is from a thing about the Hanford site, and it talks about how these particular tanks, which contain some of the most toxic stuff, are leaking cesium, strontium, plutonium, and other contaminants into the soil. So as someone who is in the greater vicinity of this place, like this is profoundly not cool. And again, not to just sound ridiculous and bougie, but it's like it impacts everyone's life in like a real way. Like, you know, my partner and I, again, it's like we're looking in this region and it's like, oh, well, do you want to live next to the nuclear reactor site where they're storing like leaking plutonium containers? And it's like, no, not really. That doesn't sound great. But it's like, where are you going to go, right? Because in the United States, we've just got tons of this crap, pardon my language, but that's what it is. And it's just hanging out. So this kind of shows where it's concentrated. Some of these states, it's partly concentrated because of research facilities or other types of production. It's also interesting to see this map and to think about how in different plans of what people wanted to have happen, there's a sacred site in Nevada that's called Yucca Mountain, and that was intended to be the national waste repository of the United States. And fortunately, the tribes there were able to say, no, please do not use our sacred mountain for uranium waste, and we're willing to fight about it. If that had come to fruition, this map might look different, and we might have a lot more waste concentrated in one or two spots. Okay. And then this is just a last little map to sort of underscore what we're dealing with in the US in terms of the site-specific places where we've got different kinds of nuclear waste being stored or nuclear production happening. And as you can see, it's all over. And the other thing to know is also this waste gets trucked. So it's not just somebody's problem if you're like in Montana and you're like, yeah, I'm good. We just have to deal with all of our legacy of silver mining. No, that's, you know, stuff gets trucked through and there's other concerns. Okay, so with that sort of very quick crash course, or maybe not so quick, but review into the state of nuclear energy production, particularly in the United States and some of the issues with that storage, let's go to the open education part, because that's what we're here for. We're talking about open ed. This is a doorway and what we might call a ruin, or more culturally sensitive, we would call like an ancestral Pueblo dwelling. This is actually in the Bears Ears National Monument, which is another proposed site of uranium development in the US. So the big pictures that I have throughout the rest of the presentation actually come from that place. So going into AI and open education. How is AI being used in open, and why are these things connected? So first, I just want to talk about AI and open, and then I'm going to pull it all together, hopefully, and tell you how, in my mind, I think there's a very strong relationship between these things and what that means. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen the AI and OER craze of sorts. I will say that in my time away, it's been really exciting to come back and see more critical conversation in open land about AI. I feel like when I went out in November, it was just like a lot of enthusiasm, and it's been great to see a little bit more conversation start. And I will also just say for this person here, this is in no way intended to be about your specific presentation. I just put yours up as a representative example here of some of this conversation, which I think is a good conversation for us to be having. How is AI being used in open? As a tool for authors creating content. So folks who are writing textbooks or OER, it's a great brainstorming or collaborative tool is the argument. In instruction context, such as loading an open textbook into an LLM and having students interact and self-quiz with the material. Using large language models to network or connect interoperable modules from content originating from MOOCs or massive open online courses, such as those offered by Harvard and Stanford. And this MIT Open Learning series, I really suggest to check this out. It's like 9 papers all about open learning and AI, and some really interesting stuff in here. And I'm trying to be equanimous in this, I guess you might say. And so I do think there is value in AI. It is an interesting new research development. And also some of the conversation about it, I think, is not very in touch with the actual reality of the technology. And there's all these drawbacks that we're going to talk about. But I am trying to, in my own mind, be open about it while also understanding the drawbacks. So how is AI being used in education? As a tool for those who create materials, again, thinking of instructors, teachers, other kinds of people who are in instruction context, maybe in less formal ways, as an interactive tool for student prompting and discovery, by students to self-teach, practice concepts, and quiz themselves, by entrepreneurs hoping to create profitable education products. My partner told me they saw a Shark Tank episode where someone has an AI to help with college admissions, and the first entirely AI-powered school in Brownsville, Texas. Ooh. What is going on with that? It's the first all AI school. So this school, your kid logs on for 2 hours of AI sessions a day, and that's it. You have had an education. Unsurprisingly, perhaps to some of us, Brownsville is a extremely brown place. So it's the 18th most populous city in Texas, and it ranks as one of the top US cities in terms of the percentage of Hispanic residents. And I want you to ask yourself, is AI school being deployed in a place with a lot of Mexican and Puerto Rican kids because people want good things for them, or because those students always get the worst, most warehoused and industrialized treatment? I think it's the latter. I'll leave it to you to form your own opinion. I haven't had a time to dive into this alpha school very deeply, but what I've seen is I'm not a fan. How much does all that new AI actually use? How much electricity is it using? That's kind of the big question, and the sort of thing that pulls this together to all that nuclear energy and storage talk we were just going through. No one really knows. Sorry to tell you, I was hoping to slop down. I did a presentation last year at the Open Aggie series, and I did try to estimate, hey, like how much is a library instruction and how much water, electricity is that going to use? Turns out we still don't know. No one really knows. This is a quote from a woman named Sasha Lucioni. She's a researcher at the French-American AI firm Hugging Face. And the quote is, "The generative AI revolution comes with a planetary cost that is completely unknown to us." We don't know how much energy it's using. How is that possible? Partly because these big tech companies are super secretive about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how much energy and resources it uses. One of the ways it's estimated is actually by the number of chips that are imported. So economists and researchers in this area actually look at how many GPU chips are being imported into the country and then estimate, if all those chips were running, how much electricity would they be using. I think this is such a wild way it'd be like if we were trying to calculate textbook costs by seeing how many trees had been cut down, which would be an interesting way to do it. But I don't know that I could ever say, here's the cost savings for my university, right? Like it shows how non-transparent these systems are, even while they use so many public resources. I did want to give you some fast facts here, though. So this is kind of a long quote. I think at the end, we really see the main part of this, which is that generating one image using AI can use almost as much energy as charging your smartphone. And of course, most of the time when you use AI, you don't just generate one image. It takes a few prompts to get what you want. So each time, even in a modest AI use, you're using an equivalent amount of energy as charging your phone 5 or 10, 15 times. And I'll admit, sometimes I think these are not the best arguments. I think it's oftentimes like when we're trying to show an improvement with open materials and it's like a 3% or a 5% improvement. And it's like, these aren't the types of numbers that necessarily move people. But if you're the type of person that you're curious and you want to be able to answer a sort of question like this for a student, this is some of the research out there and what I've been able to find. While the precise energetic and environmental cost of AI at this time may be unknowable, we can tell that there's already tangible impacts on the environment and in energy production. Some recent headlines, just to sort of set the stage for that, we're just seeing a lot more interest in bringing back old nuclear power plants in the United States, turning on old coal power plants. We're going the wrong way with our energy consumption. Ideally, we should be using our efficiency gains to use less energy and not more. And what's happening is that there's more demand than ever for energy to supply these huge data centers. So I'm sure most of you know this by now, but of course your AI request just goes to a huge server farm somewhere where all of these computers work on that on your behalf. And those computers use a lot of energy. And the more this technology scales, the more energy it's going to use. Google's data centers use 20% more water in 2022 than 2021. Microsoft's water use rose by 34%. Right now, a rough estimate is that in 2026, they're going to use about the total energy consumption of what Japan, the whole country, does, right? So thinking about that's how much our United States data centers are going to be using in terms of energy. They're also having devastating impacts on water. This is just a little quote saying that Google did what it could to keep it secret how much water was going to use at the Dalles, Oregon. That's actually a city about 2 hours away from here that's on the Columbia River. And Google wanted to put a big data center there. They partly need a lot of water to cool these data centers. And yeah, they did everything they could to make sure that folks didn't know that they were going to use about a quarter of the water supply for that area. And that includes drinking water, potable water, right? It's not reused water or wastewater in any meaningful way. So all of this leads me to ask, like, does cost still matter in open? If you uncritically are just so gung-ho about AI and you're not thinking about these, like, has cost just left the chat as a consideration? If we decided that for AI, there's like a special carve out that cost doesn't matter. And I'm defining cost here in a sort of economist way. Cost here means both what the learner is paying, but also what the resource production and use cost is to the environment / the world. Also, just even coming down more pragmatically, a lot of these are freemium platforms that have free features at one level, but you have to pay to have better features or more sophisticated use of the software. This is not a good ecosystem to be throwing learners into. It's going to exacerbate financial and economic advantage, not reduce it. And I also just think this last point that like classroom and educational use has always been a driver of widespread technological adoption. So sometimes I think, you know, speaking for us in the United States, educators are often, we feel unappreciated and sort of forgotten, and thus we feel unimpactful. And I just want to point out to you that it's like Microsoft and Apple did not push all of their desktop computers and all of their software to education systems because we are unprofitable or we don't matter. So how widely technology is embraced by education has always been part of a core business strategy for these tech giants. So it's like we have a part to play in all of this. And I know a lot of us are maybe able to criticize AI, but we have, you know, our institution is moving ahead with it. And I don't think it's like an all or nothing proposition. I think it's partly, hopefully, this talk at the end, we're going to dive into some ideas about how to respond to AI rolling out and what to do pragmatically speaking. So at the core for me is this question: if a resource is free, but every use causes environmental degradation, what is the actual cost? What's the connection between AI and nuclear power? So how do we kind of pull all this together? Is there a connection? To me, there are many direct connections. First, in the US, where, like I said, we're seeing that increased demand is fueling the reactivation of energy production plants we had shuttered, including 3 Mile Island, which is the sort of most well-known nuclear accident in the United States. A lot of people think it's the biggest, but I will show you in a minute it's not. As well as bringing new other kinds of power plants like coal plants back online. Canada will be supplying the uranium for us. And of course, we're going to mine our own out of a lot of sacred sites, but it will impact Canada as well. And thinking about how you guys are exporting that uranium and that mining on your land that then becomes your problem for generations. And additionally, in Canada, where 50% of that power already comes from nuclear energy, obviously anything that uses power is being powered in a nuclear context. And so I think, again, that particular sort of consciousness about how are we using this resource that's so energy intensive is really relevant. This is sort of a sidebar in a presentation that's got too many sidebars, so I'll try to keep it short. But AI is also now being used to like manage nuclear power plants in the United States, as in monitor and maintain the systems and the machines. And we're evidently doing that without any regulation. This is like so scary and it's like such a global issue. You know, the thing about nuclear waste is it does not care about your national border whatsoever. So something to know and sort of to to think about as like, wow, this technology is we're just rolling it out everywhere, and there's all kinds of implications. And there's also a very, very direct connection, which is OpenAI CEO Sam Altman is a big nuclear energy fan because he knows he has built a product that needs tons of energy. It's sort of like how Henry Ford needed roads, it's like, I've got this product and it needs public good to function so I can become rich. Okay. And he is building nuclear facilities. Oklo and Curio are the company. These are intended to run reactors exclusively on spent nuclear fuel. So as I mentioned, the nuclear stuff stays radioactive forever. Therefore, you could maybe use it to make things in the future. So hopefully these labs do that. It's also worth noting that recycling nuclear waste is not really like paper where you take a product and you turn it into another product that's basically safe. This is sort of like, yeah, well, it's sort of like how an unexploded ordnance could still blow up, right? Like an unexploded mine. That's why they send the bomb squad to very carefully deal with that. It's the same thing with the nuclear waste. Even the recycling of it is very dangerous and produces a lot of pollution. So direct connection between OpenAI, Sam Altman, and nuclear waste. And also, they happen to be doing a lot of these things in my sort of neck of the woods. So one of these facilities is going to be down south in the south part of Idaho at our Energy Idaho National Laboratory, Department of Energy's Idaho National Laboratory, and then also over in Washington in that Hanford area. So my argument fundamentally is that environmental costs are one significant reason AI is fundamentally anti-Indigenous. And I say anti-Indigenous specifically because in the United States, and from the brief research I was able to do in Canada as well, Native people have always borne more of the cost of this type of environmental production. So like I mentioned, a lot of people think 3 Mile Island and that accident was the biggest accident in the history of the United States. It's not. That same year, a storage pond, basically a big sort of like small reservoir of water and nuclear waste just dumped into it, making all the water nuclear, it collapsed. So 34 years after the first atomic test in 1945, a clap of sound like thunder echoed through the eastern part of the Navajo Nation near Church Rock, New Mexico. On the morning of July 16, 1979, neighbors and mill workers woke to the collapse of the huge earthen dam at the United Nuclear Corporation Church Rock uranium mill. The accident released 1,000 tons of radioactive mill tailings and 93 million gallons of acidic and radioactive wastewater into the deeply cut creek that flowed into the Rio Puerco. That's that place I showed you at the beginning with the sign. The waste flowed downstream at least 80 miles past the homes of 1,700 Navajo people. This continues to devastate the Navajo Nation. If you'd like to know more and dive into those histories, there's some links in here to some really powerful oral histories and personal testimonials of what this was like for these miners and for their families. So this book's called Memories Come to Us in the Rain and the Wind, Oral Histories and Photographs of Navajo Uranium Miners and Their Families. And the quote is, "So a lot of the Navajo ladies became widows." Unfortunately, this is not just something from the past that continues to cause generational harm in the forms of chronic illness, cancers, and other sort of mystery diseases. It's also a new threat. We're putting in new uranium mines. And for some reason, these mines need to happen in our most beautiful and sacred landscapes in the United States. So this slide shows a headline saying first uranium mines to dig in the US in 8 years begin operations near the Grand Canyon. And then there's an image to the left that shows a close-up of that. So we'll zoom in on the image. And these are the locations of these new uranium mines. The Pinyon Plain uranium mine is down here, right on the edge of the Grand Canyon National Park. It's worth noting that this is a sacred and a beautiful area. It's also an area where the Colorado River is in this watershed, and that's where all of like Phoenix, Tucson, Southwest, to some of Los Angeles gets its water from. It's a huge population that also depends on water that comes through this place. And yet a uranium mine is going to start here. There's also uranium mining proposed up north in Moab. This is what it looks like up there. these are really beautiful environments. And then, you just have this, again, really intense environmental degradation going in right in the middle of it. And people live here and are impacted by it. This location is also where we do a lot of our uranium processing in the United States. So this White Mesa uranium mill. White Mesa is a sacred site to many native tribes in this area. And unfortunately, a uranium mill was put there. And what a uranium mill does is it takes toxic waste all over and tries to create that material for the recycled stuff that Sam Altman's talking about. This is a resident who lives there, and they're saying the water under the mill is becoming more and more polluted and is moving toward our community. We used to drink the spring water for ceremonial purposes, and we don't do that anymore. We used to hunt for animals near our homes. We used to gather plants for baskets and to eat. We don't do that anymore as well. This is cultural genocide. When you make it so people can't do what they have done for time immemorial, after surviving so much, I might add, to continue an onslaught that makes it impossible to practice spiritual and life ways is a profound violence. And just because it's sort of hidden in infrastructure doesn't make it any less violent. This is what those tailing ponds look like at White Mesa. One of the things that happens with this is the water evaporates, and then this stuff right here is all just the toxic waste, and then the wind comes and it blows the dust everywhere. And yeah, it would just spread in uranium dust all over the landscape, as well as polluting the watershed. I'm going to skip that one slide because I think we've gotten the point, but if you want more facts about White Mesa, check it out. There's lots of good information there. This slide shows where all of these toxic waste is coming to. White Mesa, that refinery, is having toxic waste shipped from all over the United States and even internationally now. Japan is shipping toxic waste there. Even that mine up in Spokane that I learned about ships their toxic waste there. So as I mentioned, everything gets transported by truck or train. So this toxic waste is coming through arguably the entire geography of the US to bring all of this toxic waste and concentrate it at White Mesa. These are some folks that live at White Mesa. Yolanda Badback's family lives 3 miles south of the uranium mill. They often smell noxious fumes on the wind, is the caption. I am not Danae. I am Chicano and white. My mom is white. But we grew up in a very rural setting like this. And so when I see this, I see my family and my relations. And I hope maybe you can keep these people in mind too, as you decide how you want to engage with AI. I also just want to acknowledge that there's been some amazing activism and opposition as well in Canada to uranium mining. First Nation leaders continue to oppose Ontario Nuclear Waste Bureau projects. This is Savannah McGregor, who's the Grand Chief of the Algonquin Anishinaabe National Tribal Council, as well as other community activism and organizing against things like Shark Tank's Mr. Wonderful's data center project. And if you'd like to know more about specifically what's happening in Canada, this resource, I didn't have time to get into it because I found it kind of late in the preparation for this, but it's an amazing resource. It talks all about Canadian First Nations, Métis, people's opposition to nuclear power and uranium production. And with that in mind, it leads me to say in both America and Canada, Indigenous people say no to uranium time and time again. And it's because we're forced to bear the consequences of so-called progress more than our settler neighbors. And Indigenous people deserve an educational movement that does not continue to sacrifice us. So I could end the talk here, but as part of my practice, I like to always try to say, well, now what, right? I've hopefully articulated to you that there's a problem. Hopefully you understand why I think this is a problem, but now what? What are we going to do? For some of us, this can put a nihilistic kind of feeling in ourselves, and it's just not an option. You know, nuclear energy and waste is one of the reasons why humans have to figure everything out, because that stuff is going to continue to be on Earth for millions of years. So now we need to be here to take care of it, to make sure that life on Earth continues. So thinking about it that way, it's like we have to engage. We can't just shut down. AI, interestingly, is doing things like making its own AIs, and it's scary and interesting to think about what happens when that connects with quantum computing, which is predicted to undo the majority of our security in basically all digital contexts. And just to think about, like, this is another really powerful technology that we don't really understand, and that we don't really understand the implications. So, like, maybe let's slow down a little bit. Practically, while still being idealistic, I think we should question a vision of technological progress that always demands more physical resources, such as rare earths, power, or water. I think we should discard permagrowth for sustainable scaled degrowth and maintenance. It doesn't always have to be more and more and more. Maybe what we've got is good, and it's about maintaining what we have. There's, I think, a real underappreciation for that in Western culture. Embrace less rapid and expansive AI adoption because we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We don't even know how much it costs. So how do you know if you can afford it? You don't know. So why don't you tell me what it costs? And then I can tell you if we can afford it. That's what makes sense to me. How can we leverage what AI is really good at in a harm reduction way? I've seen a lot of promises of like AI is going to solve climate. It's not. It's really not. I think that's at best optimistic and at worst shrewd marketing. I'll tell you more a little bit why I think that, but I do think there's potentials. So for instance, in AI in Idaho, we have had textbooks that now have factual information in them, like cloud seeding is a viable solution to climate change. If AI systems can contain the knowledge of the commons and help to reach people who are in information censored or low information quality environments, that to me is a powerful potential of AI. I think AI as a sort of talking encyclopedia is a really interesting concept in terms of bringing that to more learners. But at the same time, we need to resist the efficiency trap. We know that when we become more efficient, we just use more of the thing. This is actually called the Jevons paradox. And it's basically this observation that when we had coal-powered technology hit the scene, we didn't stop having labor for people. We just made even more things. We sped up their adoption and we used up that efficiency gain. It's just kind of how we are. It's like when you get a raise and the next thing you know, you've already fully spent it and you're like, wow, what happened to that raise I got? And it's like, well, you allotted it to your expenses. So I'm just thinking about this efficiency trap and the sort of promises of AI as being overstated. I think it's really important to think about how to use AI wisely and compassionately. What does wise and compassionate use of AI look like? What would the Buddhist concept of right effort as applied to AI look like? A lot of people might not be familiar with this concept of right effort. This has a longer story, which I'll try to be succinct because I'm running out of time here. But basically, I went to this Ann Arbor Zen temple for several years. I trained in Korean Buddhism there. And one of the quotes that my teacher taught me for right speech was, before you say something, think, does this need to be said? Does this need to be said right now? And does this need to be said by me? Right. And to sort of use those prompts with yourself to ascertain and kind of filter, like, what speech do I actually need to say? Because this was taught to me in this temple context as like the Buddha said this. I learned in researching this that Craig Ferguson, the Scottish comedian, is the originator of this quote, evidently. So much learning for me in this. But this inspired me to think about what's the right action questions for AI. Do I need to use AI for this? If I choose to use AI for this particular task, how can I use this particular powerful technology most efficiently? What's the hidden costs and harms of using AI in this situation? And how will I spend that time and effort saved? So my own little poem that I wrote, do I need to use AI? Do I need to use AI right now? And how would I do it without AI? So Marco Seiferle-Valencia is inspired by Craig Ferguson. And with that, I'm going to bring us to our conclusion, which is that generative AI at its best represents a remix of the knowledge of the shared public digital commons. At a time where truth and knowledge are threatened, collective knowledge that is not controlled by one entity is a powerful tool. And at the same time, risking actual life for the simulation of intelligence will never be the right thing to do. So with that, I leave you with a beautiful depiction of some kachinas at Bears Ear National Monument from some of my ancestors. If you'd like to follow up with me, here's the information about this presentation. And I'll also just say, if you're interested in further reading on this, I really suggest these books. I haven't read I Will Live for Both of Us. I found it while researching for this. It's about Inuit resistance to uranium mining. So I'm very excited to read that one. Full Body Burden is about Rocky Flats Nuclear Production Facility in Colorado, which produced a widespread contamination over Denver, Colorado, that a lot of people don't know about. And this article is about AI's energy problem. So thank you so much for your kind attention and engaging with my talk. And I welcome any questions or thoughts that you have.
So the chat is open and Q&A is open. You can add your questions to the chat or to the Q&A. Any comment on small modular nuclear reactors?
Yes, thank you for asking, Robert. It's a really interesting question, though, small modular nuclear reactors. It's funny how that was kind of like a dream in the original sort of rollout of nuclear energy in the US. And for those who don't know, the kind of concept is like, right now, nuclear energy often happens in a way similar to coal production, where it's like you've got one big plant and it sends out energy often over vast geographic distances. The small modular nuclear reactor is the sort of concept of like, a nuclear reactor in every neighborhood and sort of locally powering that need closer to the source and with smaller reactors. I don't have as much knowledge on the environmental outputs of those, but I think a lot of the same problems remain, because even though they're using small amounts of waste or uncontaminated original fuel, they still produce nuclear waste. And I think there's still pretty large risks in terms of having that in your neighborhood. I will say, though, that, Canada, I was really surprised to learn how much of the energy production there is already nuclear. And so people may have a different sort of feeling of comfort in terms of, I think Americans are still sort of all over the place in how they respond to this proposition. So there may be a more pragmatic view there. But yeah, I think I still have the same questions about where is that uranium coming from and how is it being stored and disposed of, and is it safe? And at the same time, intriguing possibilities for sort of descaling our power grids and also sort of moving off this huge interconnected grid that's going to have all of these climate susceptibilities. I think it's going to be a compelling argument for some people to be able to say our region could have its own little power sort of source. And so I think we're going to hear more about small modular nuclear reactors and their equivalents as things go forward. Lori asks, I live and work in the Silicon Valley of California, where my colleagues seem absorbed in the race to try out each new AI tool first. Any suggestions for asking critical questions without being dismissed as a Luddite? Oh, Lori, well, I wish we could have a non-recorded conversation about that. I think the thing that first comes to mind, and I'll try to think carefully about how I want to say this in this context, is a lot of what gets presented as people sort of saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or you're a Luddite, is, in my opinion, often misogyny, racism, sexism, other types of bigotry are often expressed in this. So, for instance, if you're asking critical questions, I often wonder, would those be received in the same way that maybe another peer for someone who is equally excited about this technology? Like, would that feedback be taken in a different way? So that's my first part of this question, is like, is this sort of a pretext or a subtext for some other expressions of social dynamics that we have that are unfortunate, obviously. But I think it's really about developing your own knowledge and competency with this so that you're not vulnerable to those types of attacks, to be honest. So I think there's a lot of really great resources out there that sort of explain how these tools work, and they are not thinking living beings. What I really often think I need to do another talk that's just all about this kind of central concept that, like, AI is not alive and it will never be. And if you think that it could be, then you also should probably believe in all variety of things like Frankenstein, right? Like, we're not going to be able to create a living thing from static material. Like, that's just not what we do, and we've been trying to do it forever, and we're not going to do it with AI. So I think sometimes people are like, oh, you're an idiot, you don't get AI, you don't get the potential, you don't get the promise, and it's just a way to like dismiss people. And I think the more you can be like, I understand this technology, and I also understand that a lot of what's being spun off as innovation is just product product distinction, product variation. I had a weird thing during the pandemic where I started collecting a lot of model toy horses that I had always wanted as a kid. And man, they make these things in so many different colors, and it's a great business model, right? You just get this one mold and you paint it like 8 different colors and you can sell it to me 8 times. That's what's going on with like 90% of AI things, because they're products. So I think pushing back and being like, your product is not the same thing as a research insight, as knowledge. It's a product, and I don't have to like tolerate disrespect about a product anymore in this area than I would about anything else, right? And so it's like, bring your personal confidence up to where you're like able to sort of take that position, or whatever your equivalent is. That's what I would say. Hi, Ryan. Thanks so much. Nice to hear from you. Thank you for being here. Ryan's question is, first, this has been fantastic. Thank you. Second, do you happen to have a sense of when locally run, i.e. entirely on one's own computer device, AI tools might become viable for use in education? That's the use case I've increasingly heard people about in open communities thinking about in terms of privacy, knowing the inputs. Yeah. And Ryan says also that he's personally still highly skeptical about whether it will be a right trade-off. Yeah, I think this is one sort of harm reduction approach that people have thought about, which is, and the concern about the way that AI takes everything that you put into it, and we don't know what it does with it or where it might end up, or whose other AI than your content might end up in. Some educators have felt like, oh, a closed AI system is going to be safer. So it's going to be like something that we're running on either a local instance in our server, or in Ryan's case, he's talking more about when you're able to do it in just an entirely local setting. Like I download a chat GPT and I disconnect it from the internet. I think there's sort of some conceptual things about that, which is like, how valuable is a static copy of the internet? Because if you cut chat GPT off from the internet, then it's by default not able to learn anything new. And it's sort of like at a time capsule perspective. This is why I refer to it as the talking encyclopedia, is because it's like always sort of in that position of having a corpus of data that it can speak to about. But the kind of open question is like, how is it getting new things in there? For me, Ryan, I think the most tangible and pragmatic issue or obstacle I see is that, at least for right now, that's going to require sophisticated and expensive enough technology that it's not going to be accessible for poor or even middle income education settings. So I think that's probably also a sort of a quantum computing question. There's a lot of hype about quantum computing right now. And for those that don't know, basically what that involves is putting computer chips in hyper cold, like unnaturally cold environments. And then you're able to create these quantum states that involve using spooky physics, which is where the normal laws of physics as we understand them do not apply. And thus these computers can do things that are sort of analogous to magic in our own way of understanding, like they can explore multiple paths at once instead of having to do just one or the other at the same time. So thinking about like a quantum computer is going to be able to handle an LLM like nothing, right? And at the same time, creating unnatural physical states also requires extraordinary amounts of energy. So it all just kind of keeps coming back to like, it all requires extraordinary amounts of energy at a time when our greatest minds in this area are saying we need to be using less and being more efficient. So I don't know, Ryan, I think it's kind of an interesting outcome. There's also, I think, an argument to be made about, I think it's called DeepSeek, which is sort of China's equivalent of some of these LLMs, and it uses way fewer chips. The United States was sort of shocked that this technology was able to be made. It caused the price of NVIDIA, the stock, for it to crash because of how disruptive it was. And part of what those researchers were able to do was create something that acts a lot like chat GPT without all the chips. But there's also been some controversy about if they actually did that, or if it's actually sort of like multiple chat GPTs in a trench coat that then they called something else. So it's a really, really fascinating area. And I think there's room for lots of ways to engage on this. And I just hope my talk today gives you some human impact and some human faces and some context to think about what all of this means in our world of energy production and energy resources, in particular, some of the issues with nuclear energy. So, thank you so much.